I will be mispronouncing John Frusciante's name several times in this video. No, I don't really care. When Unlimited Love released earlier this year, my expectations for the return of John Frusciante were not only not met, they were hardly fulfilled at all, and on top of the frankly juvenile and generally weak lyrical work from Anthony Kiedis, I was not really a fan of that last record at all. However, Return of the Dream Canteen, while it certainly isn't a perfect record, does follow through more so on what I was expecting from the last Red Hot Chili Peppers album. Hi there everyone, welcome back to On the Flip Side. My name is Adam Shawwalker, your host, and today we're going to be checking out this new album from the legendary California funk rock band, the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and they are back with this new album, Return of the Dream Canteen. Like I was saying before, Unlimited Love really did not do it for me at all. In my opinion, other than the main theme of that album being usually unintentionally creepy love songs, I didn't really see much of a purpose or message behind that record. And that's not to say that Chili Peppers have ever had much of a message lyrically, but even with the return of John Frusciante, I would have expected that album be loaded with more impressive guitar work, but across the 17-song track listing, there really wasn't much of any of that. So that left me wondering where exactly the Red Hot Chili Peppers were going with that project, because past just the lack of distinctive guitar work or lyrics, the rhythm section, while solid, wasn't really standing out much to me either. So they announced this new album, Return of the Dream Canteen, and I want to say in like mid-July. I was kind of initially very baffled. The first single and the first track here, Tip of My Tongue, while on first impression I was a little underwhelmed with, I quickly realized past just the first few listens that this material, while maybe not something I'd go out of my way to listen to, was still very much leagues ahead of what came out on Unlimited Love. Like I said on my reaction video for that track, if that song was an indicator for a shorter project, maybe a solid half hour of material, I think I would overall come away with a fairly positive or very positive impression of the whole thing. And much to my disappointment, this album is another 17 tracks like the last record. However, this album has a much more jammy psychedelic rock style than even the last record. So while I don't think that there's much of a central theme like the love songs from the last record, I think that's okay because the writing here doesn't seem to pigeonhole itself into that concept, and luckily that ends up mostly paying off. Where it seems like the focus went on this album instead was each individual track, so while the quality can vary wildly, it does seem like each song has a much higher chance of actually being really good. It's kind of like rolling 6d6s as opposed to rolling 1d6 and multiplying it by 6. The odds are better, but there is still some risk, though a lot less since you're more likely to have a few at least pretty good rolls. So there are definitely a lot of tracks on this thing that are better than others, and a lot more songs on here that aren't really bad, but maybe are just kind of average or maybe even forgettable, but here that's at least better than just downright awful. Like I said, Tip of My Tongue was my first indicator that this album was at least stepping in a direction I was more of a fan of than the last record. I like the bass work, I think it's excellent, I'm a big fan of the floaty chorus work. I do think this track is also a very decent late era song for the Chili Peppers, especially with its embrace of acid-fueled 70s funk sounds. Peace and Love I think has a fairly decent instrumental section. It feels very two-step driven. Not the biggest fan of this one, as I feel it falls more into the realm of forgettable in most cases, and at worst gives me some weird vibes with the peace and love hippie thing, which I get, but I don't really think comes off very great, or at least comes off as one of the most cliche-heavy tracks here. Reach Out I think is actually really good. It's a way more alternative rock sound that they're going for here, like they're kind of trying to do an Audioslave track or something during these big rock the audience choruses, which are a little bit silly but kind of cool coming from this source. I do also really like the swing from these more stripped back verses into those big boosts in sound. It's actually really solid. Eddie as a track I do like to a certain extent. I do really appreciate the tribute to Van Halen here, obviously. And it's funny, when I first saw the title, I had forgotten Eddie Van Halen had died. Like, I just totally had forgotten about that. Totally slipped my mind. I thought this was for a second like an Eddie Hazel tribute, like Ween's Tear for Eddie, and then I realized that, like, wait, I'm an idiot. Van Halen's been dead for like 2 years now, which is kind of fucked up. Like, I feel like there was some sort of Mandela effect thing, and I just can't believe it's been that long already. Anyway, past that, this song is pretty solid. I'm not a huge fan of the more mellow bits here. As a Van Halen tribute, I was kind of expecting more of like a high energy track, which this does eventually kind of get to. The solo work, while it isn't nearly as rip-roaring as like the old Van Halen stuff, it does feel like it's at least delivered with some level of grief fused into the playing. So I respect that respect and the care taken here. I just think that the final product is fine, but not exactly mind-blowing. I do also like the track Fake as Fuck past the intro with this quick tempo shift that I kind of wish it was held a little bit longer or focused on more. I definitely think that this one had a lot more potential that wasn't really followed through on that well. Bella is probably one of the most forgettable songs here, very much feels like an Unlimited Love leftover. Roulette is a slight improvement from the last track, but it still has a very hard time really gripping me. It screams screams road trip music to zone out to, or like play this on the 10 freeway while you're praying not to get stuck in traffic. My Cigarette is kinda neat with this somewhat electronic beat for the drum work and some light keyboard work. It's almost like they're doing a lo-fi track, which is actually really cool. I could also see this song being sampled for like a rap project or something. Afterlife is easily one of the best tracks here, a lot more upbeat, feels a lot more in line with some of the more classic material. I am also digging the solo work on this track, which almost feels like this is the energy that they should have been pulling on Eddie. Shoot Me a Smile instrumentally sounds like a less distortion-heavy Sunny Day Real Estate track, and I do mean that in a good way. It's again one of the better songs here. Handful has a lot of cool work between the drums and bass with a lot of solid filling guitar work. I do think that this track, as well as a lot of other songs here, could have maybe been cut down or maybe thrown together, because even though I do like this song, it doesn't really go anywhere over the course of its 4-minute runtime, which is a very familiar story with a lot of tracks on this album. It's like what they did is they came up with one central riff for every track that ranged from okay to pretty good, and they kind of phoned in the tracks that had like only had okay riffs. So you have these clearly more fleshed out songs right next to songs that are far more cohesive and much more interesting. Like the next track, The Drummer, which I actually think might be my favorite song here. It's short, but not too short. It doesn't get long-winded. It is just a solid, jammy track that feels like it should have been like way higher up on the track listing for this album. Bag of Grins works through a much more tense, or at least tense for a Red Hot Chili Peppers track, sound that feels very much like they're pulling from some like Alice in Chains material, but then they're kind of blending in some light synth work, which is just kind of crazy. But yeah, this is a solid song right next to The Drummer, which is probably the high point for this album. La 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 I am not the biggest fan of, but that's mostly just because this isn't really a sound that I'm super into, but it's really stripped back in comparison to a lot of what's here, and I do appreciate the experimentation a lot. Copperbelly again feels like they're going for like an alt-rock sound or a grunge sound, especially for the chorus. I'm really liking the guitar and bass work on this one, especially leading up to and into the guitar solo. Carry Me Home is a bluesy track that I think really rips. I'm kind of thrown with this Anthony Kiedis vocal delivery, which obviously does that kind of quick staccato thing like on a lot of this album, but I just kind of don't like it on this track very much. It just feels like this very blues rock heavy song shouldn't have that kind of singing over top of it, but maybe that's just me. The final track, In the Snow, is one of the most interesting on the album, again dipping into that very light electronic sound, which to me was pretty unexpected, but definitely not unwelcome. You see, this is the experimentation that I'd been hoping for, and this is usually the kind of thing I've been wishing more bands would try. Not necessarily this like Depeche Mode light thing for everyone, but this light genre pushing that so many bands either completely ignore or just go way overboard with. In this case, the Red Hot Chili Peppers have actually managed to just nail it, and I'm very much enjoying this. The one thing that I'm not a huge fan of here is the kind of tacky poetry reading around the halfway point of the song, but I guess I should have been expecting that kind of thing, because if it was going to be anywhere on this album, it was gonna be here. But even still, cool song. I think it is one of my favorites here easily. So the Red Hot Chili Peppers, after Unlimited Love, have actually been able to woo me a bit. I still think a lot of the top half of this album is kind of weak. I'm generally a bigger fan of the more experimental second half, but I can appreciate the reach that they've got on this album, especially compared to that last record, which to me was just very bland. Like I said way earlier, I was hoping for a cool 30, maybe 40 minutes of material, and in a way I did kind of get that. It just also happened to be with an additional 40 minutes of stuff that I just don't really love. Return of the Dream Canteen I think is a mixed bag, but I do think it has a lot more flavor and at least a lot more character than I was expecting, and overall has been a far more enjoyable listen than I could have hoped for. That being said, it still absolutely has its issues. Obviously, there are my own problems that I have with it. I'm sure that many of you will probably enjoy exactly the opposite of the tracks that I enjoy, as it seems that when it comes to Red Hot Chili Peppers, that people's opinions of their material vary wildly. So with that being said, I think Return of the Dream Canteen is a pretty solid 6. Thank you all so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of this album in the comments below, and remember to like and subscribe, and if you like what I'm doing here, leave a tip in the PayPal, and check out my Reverb, my Instagram, and my Depop. Links to those are all in the description below. Thank you all so much again, and we'll see you on the flip side.